Firstpost reports from the world's second largest continent. Hello, I'm Alison LaGrange. A very warm welcome from Durban, South Africa. We get you the news and the newsmakers from Africa. From elections to climate change to innovations and opportunities. As the world's attention shifts, we report from Africa, the heart of the global south. Join me every weekday live on Firstpost. Hello and welcome to Firstpost Africa, where we get you the top stories from the continent and from across the world. I'm Alison LaGrange, coming to you live from Durban, South Africa. First, let's take a look at the headlines. Kamala Harris heads to North Carolina and Donald Trump turns to Arizona as focus shifts to the swing states in the U.S. after the pivotal debate between the two presidential candidates. Russian drones inflict significant damage to energy infrastructure in the northern Ukrainian town of Sumy, cutting power to several settlements and leaving at least 14 injured. Turkey begins investigation into the killing of a US-Turkish activist during a protest in West Bank. Ankara says it would press the UN to take immediate action. Junior doctors in the Indian city of Kolkata continue their strike, defying the Supreme Court's order to resume duty. They are protesting the rape and murder of a doctor last month. And the Polaris Dawn crew, consisting of 4 civilian astronauts led by billionaire Jared Isaacman, create history as they conduct the world's first private spacewalk. Hello and welcome. Let's take a look at our top story. Africa's quest for a permanent seat at the United Nations Security Council has gotten the crucial backing of the United States. The US is supporting the creation of 2 permanent UNSC seats for African states. In addition, it also supports another seat to be rotated among small island developing states. As per reports, the US ambassador to the UN, Linda Thomas-Greenfield, is soon going to make an announcement regarding this. However, ahead of the announcement, the US ambassador has said that Washington does not support expanding veto power beyond the 5 countries that hold it. The United Nations Security Council is the most powerful body in the United Nations. The Security Council is charged with maintaining international peace and security. It has the power to impose sanctions and arms embargoes and to authorize the use of force and intervention. The Council comprises of 15 members, 5 permanent and 10 non-permanent. The permanent members include Russia, China, France, the US, and Britain. Each year, the General Assembly elects 5 new members from different geographical groups for 2-year terms on the Security Council. Africa currently has 3 seats rotated among states. Now the US nod for the 2 permanent African seats and a rotating seat for Africa comes amid Washington's long-held support for countries like India, Japan, and Germany to also get permanent seats on the Council. Any change to the Security Council membership is done by amending the founding UN Charter. This needs the approval and ratification by 2/3 of the General Assembly, including the Security Council's current 5 veto powers. Developing nations have long demanded UNSC permanent seats, but years of talks on reform have proved fruitless. Momentum has grown in recent years amid growing geopolitical rivalries like the Russia-Ukraine war and the war in Gaza that have deadlocked the Council. Last month, African nation Sierra Leone convened a debate advocating for the 2 permanent seats. Now, these sentiments were echoed by other UN officials, including Secretary General Antonio Guterres. The UN chief asserted that the demands of Africa must be heard. However, the US ambassador has said that she could not say how long it might take to get the General Assembly to vote for a resolution that can reform the UN. Even though calls for overhauling the UN have only been growing, a clear path for change is currently still not in sight. Will the US support for Africa quicken the process? Now, for more on this, we have with us Patrick Smith, editor of Africa Confidential. He joins us live from London, UK. Hello to you, Patrick. Thank you for being with us.
Good evening.
Now, what are the main reasons behind the US support for creating the 2 permanent United Nations Security Council seats for African countries?
The US joins all the other big powers on the Council in supporting seats for Africa. The European Union has passed a resolution supporting 2 African seats. So has Britain individually. So has France, China, and Russia. So that's not odd or out of step with what is being pushed generally. I guess the additional idea of having a rotating seat for a small island state is new. That's something else. But what the US doesn't explain is how that's going to sit with the present setup. As you said, you have the 5 permanent members that have vetoes, and then the US is backing 2 African seats, a seat for Japan, India, and Germany. So 3 other new members. Hasn't mentioned anything about Latin America, and hasn't dealt with the question of whether Pakistan would get a seat. So then naturally, you're likely to get some opposition from Pakistan unless it gets a seat. Because it would try to balance out India's seat. So there are quite a few geopolitical snags in getting this through, I'd say. The other one is why should the new permanent members be regarded as permanent members if they don't have veto power? And what is going to happen to the current veto powers that the old 5 members, the founding members of the Security Council get, because that is really a relic from the Second World War, as many of the critics of the system point out. And so should it not be the case that all members of the permanent members of the Security Council have a veto, or no members of the permanent members of the Security Council have a veto? I think that question has to be resolved. It's obviously the trickiest question. And of course, it's somewhat Kafkaesque, because as I understand it, although the General Assembly has a 2/3 vote on this matter, the Security Council is the final arbiter of whether the 5 permanent members of the Security Council cast their veto. And of course, if there was a motion to a resolution to withdraw the veto from the 5 current permanent members of the Security Council, presumably one of those members, or all of them, would veto that resolution. So you get into a circular argument, and you really need, at this time of unprecedented geopolitical rivalries, you need a deal between Russia, Moscow, and Beijing, and France and Britain. And I wonder where that is really going to come from right now.
Right. And Patrick, considering what you've just mentioned there, especially around the veto vote, how might the inclusion of African countries as permanent members impact the dynamics and the decision-making processes within the Security Council?
Well, it would be good for the continent of Africa for certain. In a sense, it would mean Africa with 1.4 billion people gets 2 permanent members on the Security Council. Asia, providing the India and the Japanese seats go ahead, along with China, would then have three members representing probably 3.5 billion people. So there would be an attempt to sort of level out the number of Security Council seats according to population, at least for Africa and Asia. But of course, Europe would remain grossly overrepresented in population terms, with Britain and France total population about 140 million on a good day between them, with 2 seats on the Security Council with veto power. So that there'd still be a geopolitical imbalance, if you like. In terms of the mechanics of the Security Council's operation, I mean, Ambassador Thomas-Greenfield hasn't spelt out how it would be different. But as you mentioned, the Security Council has the power to impose sanctions on states, has the power to impose arms embargoes. And those are negotiated with the only extra power the current 5 have is that they can veto sanctions they don't like. So obviously Russia will veto any attempt to sanction it for invading Ukraine. And of course, within the dynamics of the Security Council, you get a lot of pressure on the non-permanent members at the moment to cast their votes according to their sort of political alliances across the world. So that's going to continue, I would say. The veto thing is really, really important. I think it's key to the power of the permanent membership.
Yeah, absolutely. And what are the potential challenges and obstacles to achieving a possible reform in the UNSC? And can they be addressed? And how can they be addressed, if so?
Well, as Ambassador Thomas-Greenfield said, she is proposing this measure, but she has no idea how long it will take to get through the General Assembly. Africa is, in theory, in a very good position at the General Assembly. It's got 54 members of the UN, so it's really got 54 votes in the bag already out of 193 votes at the General Assembly. And presumably, if the reform that the Americans are proposing, if those are packaged with the seats for Japan, India, and Germany, a lot of votes would be coming from other Asian states, those Asian states aligned to India and Japan, and those European states, which would be pretty much the 27 members of the European Union, aligned with Germany. So in theory, you can imagine them getting pretty easily, pretty close to 2/3 of the 193 members. So in theory, it should go through. It's all about political will. And of course, then, this is a geopolitical game. America wants to look good in the eyes of Africa. That's why it's pushing this. It's pushing a lot of initiatives in Africa at the moment on transport and logistics and investment in critical minerals, etc., etc. So this is all part of the America's wooing of Africa at the moment. And it's worth mentioning that this initiative comes a week after the Forum of China Africa Cooperation was held in Beijing, where you had over 50 African leaders coming to Beijing, and China making promises of distributing over $50 billion of finance to African states over the next 3 years, and being a clear and solid ally of Africa when it comes to security matters. So, you've got to see this American proposal, I would argue, in the context of geopolitical rivalries between Washington, Beijing, Washington, Moscow, and so on. But that doesn't mean it has to fail. It could succeed simply because everyone wants it to work.
Right. Patrick, thank you very much for being with us on Firstpost Africa. Great to speak to you as always.
Thank you. See you again.
A worsening political crisis in North Africa's Libya has put to test the newly formed alliance between Egypt and Turkey. Now, reports say that the two countries that recently began a new phase of ties after years of friction remain at odds over how to end Libya's political divisions. Since the fall of Muammar Gaddafi in 2011, Libya's political institutions have been divided between the East and the West. The Tripoli-based Western administration, headed by Prime Minister Abdul Hamid Dbeibeh, is backed by Turkey, while the Benghazi-based Eastern administration, headed by the authoritarian warlord Khalifa Haftar, has received support from Egypt and also the United Arab Emirates and Russia. Now, the latest point of conflict between the two administrations is the Libyan central bank chief Sadiq al-Kabir. Now, he fled to self-imposed exile in Turkey, saying that he feared for his life after he was removed by Tripoli-based government headed by Prime Minister Dbeibeh. Now, Libya's central bank oversees the internal distribution of the largest oil wealth in Africa. It has around $80 billion worth of foreign reserves, most of it from oil revenues. It also owns two of Libya's main commercial banks. The sacked governor, Sadiq al-Kabir, has been targeting Dbeibeh government in recent months. He has accused Tripoli of overspending and mismanaging the country's oil revenues. The Dbeibeh government accuses him of favoring the forces in the east. Now, the Eastern administration has decried his ouster, calling it unconstitutional. The standoff also led to the temporary closure of most of Libya's oil fields. According to reports, Turkey's head of intelligence, Ibrahim Kalin, flew to Tripoli immediately after the presidents of Egypt and Turkey met. This was reportedly to pursue the UN-recognized Libyan administration's head Dbeibeh to let Sadiq Kabir back into office on an interim basis, or to find a new consensus board to head the bank. Last week, Egypt's President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi visited Ankara to meet with the Turkish President Erdogan, and the two signed more than 30 memorandums of understanding to boost trade. But in just a week, the two new partners find themselves at opposite sides of the Libyan conflict, posing an immediate challenge for el-Sisi and Erdogan. Shifting focus to South Africa, President Cyril Ramaphosa faces a tough test as cracks appear in his newly formed government of national unity. Friction is brewing among South Africa's ruling alliance's members over a new education bill. Ramaphosa, who leads the African National Congress, or the ANC, says he will sign the bill into law despite the opposition from the coalition partner, the Democratic Alliance, or the DA. The bill will make several changes to basic education laws in South Africa. Now, the controversy is over a measure that allows strengthening of government oversight over schools' language and admission policies. In the current arrangement, school governing bodies, consisting mostly of parents and community leaders, determine these. The ANC says some children are still excluded from schools based on language, which has been used as a proxy for race. Thus, the need for the bill. Although the bill does not name any specific language or group, many believe it will target South Africa's white Afrikaans-speaking community. Community groups say the bill threatens the survival of Afrikaans schools. The DA, which is a strong advocate for the white minority in South Africa, has raised concerns that the bill would give the government more control over white minority language schools. The party has defended the right of school governing bodies to determine their language policies, as it cited the importance of mother tongue education. The party leader, John Steenhuisen, has said that he would meet Ramaphosa before he signs the bill into law on Friday. One civil society group has threatened to take legal action to oppose the bill once Ramaphosa signs it. Now, the ANC and the DA came into an uneasy alliance after the Ramaphosa-led party lost its parliamentary majority for the first time in 30 years after the May elections. The party then sought to form a government of national unity and invited all of the other parties to join. The DA, along with several other small parties, entered the coalition with the ANC. Political analysts had then raised doubt about their partnership due to their ideological differences, and doubted if such a government would be able to function smoothly. The DA says the passing of the education bill would violate the agreements and understandings that formed the basis of the government of national unity. But the ANC has pressed that its partners should not threaten the government over a bill. Will the new education bill jeopardize South Africa's newly formed government? Or will the parties sort out their differences? It remains to be seen. An earthquake of 6.8 magnitude shook the North African country of Morocco on the 8th of September last year. It killed nearly 3,000 people, displaced 500,000 citizens, and destroyed nearly 60,000 homes. It was the strongest earthquake that the country had witnessed in 120 years. 1 year on, the horrors of the widespread devastation continue to haunt the citizens. Most of the villages in the high Atlas Mountains of central Morocco are still struggling to find their path to normalcy. The residents continue to live in makeshift tents, waiting for their homes to be rebuilt. Our next report gets you more.
Widespread devastation. Piles of dead bodies. Buildings turned into ruins. Hundreds and thousands crying for help. These sites narrate the horrors of a deadly earthquake that battered Morocco last year. On September 8, 2023, a 6.8 magnitude quake shook the North African nation and killed nearly 3,000 people. It displaced 500,000 people and destroyed nearly 60,000 homes. It's the worst earthquake the country has witnessed in 120 years. The Al Hous province was one of the worst-hit regions of Morocco. The strong tremors turned homes in the high Atlas Mountains into stacks of rubble. The return to normalcy has been slower than what Moroccans must have hoped for. 1 year on, much of the damage from the quake continues to haunt citizens in towns like Amizmiz. Here, the people are still trying to rebuild their houses. They had to navigate a multi-step bureaucracy to secure funds from the government required for restoration work. After the assessment, the Moroccan authorities provided a sum varying from $8,900 to $17,800 to rebuild the quake-hit houses.
I got the first and second installments of support, which is $4,000 to rebuild. We are now waiting for the third installment to complete the construction work. We feel that things are going well despite the delay in these procedures. When we started building, the engineer came to monitor the construction process and approve it so that we can get the remaining amount of support.
The situation is no different in another mountain village of Imin Tala. The quake destroyed almost the entire village, and the authorities decided not to rebuild it due to the risk of falling rocks from the mountain. But many people refused to leave the area. They decided to stay in makeshift tents. They consider the land a part of their identity.
The residents want to stay in this place. They all want to stay here because they have agricultural land there where they grow vegetables and it is their source of livelihood. If they go somewhere else and abandon this place, they will not be able to live there. There is plenty of water, so they want to stay here.
The residents of neighboring Tinmel village are also living a similar misery. The village is popular for its historic Tinmel mosque, which was being renovated when tremors shook the area. Now, a year later, the authorities have initiated restoration work to preserve the historical site.
We are working on rebuilding the house well and strongly, and we are trying to use strong building materials. I have not yet obtained the building permit, but I have obtained the support. I receive $250 per month.
Rebuilding homes in this rough terrain comes with a challenge. The residents not only need a roof over their heads, but also need to ensure that it can protect them from future earthquakes.
We are not afraid now because we are rebuilding the house well. We are using good and strong building materials. I used iron supports of 12 centimeter thickness and strong foundations here. I got the building permit and everything is fine.
The Moroccan government is doing its bit to help people. The authorities have issued over 55,000 reconstruction permits. According to the Moroccan government, nearly 1,000 families have been able to build a home for themselves. The government has disbursed a monthly support of around $700 for close to 64,000 families. This means thousands of families are yet to recover from the damage caused by the earthquake. And the figures don't reveal the misery of those who couldn't secure support from the government. Many have been forced to seek alternative sources of funds to rebuild their houses or stay in temporary housing. It seems for people in these areas, the road to normalcy is still long.
And that's it on the show for today. We will see you again tomorrow at the same time. Thank you for watching and goodbye.